This is the Weather Lines, the Hyperlocal AI forecast for the Nostalgic Nerds podcast. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nostalgic Nerds podcast, where we dig into the cool tech moments of the past and how they shaped our future. I'm Renee, and I'm here with Marc. Say hi, Marc.
Hey there, this is Marc.
And today we're talking about something that's evolved right in front of our eyes, weather forecasting. From calling the trusty old dial-in weather line to using hyper-local sensor networks and AI-driven forecasts, the way we get our weather updates has changed big time. So we're going to look at that journey from simply calling 555-1212. And if you've never done that, I envy you for your youth. To get tomorrow's temperatures, to having IoT-powered rooftop sensors feeding real-time data to machine learning models. Trust me, this is a wild ride of innovation, so let's get started. We're going to rewind a little bit. Way back to the 1980s. What were you doing in the 80s, Marc?
Yeah, primary school,
Damn it, man.
grade school.
I was in middle school. I was headed to high school. I graduated in 86 from high school. Yeah, all right. So way back in the 80s and 90s, when checking the weather wasn't as easy as opening your phone. You guys, we didn't have that stuff back then. If you wanted to know the temperature tomorrow, or if it was going to rain, or you had to pick up and dial a number, well, you could watch the news at 6 p.m. or 11 p.m. and it would tell you the forecast, what was going to happen the next day. I grew up in Pittsburgh, so it was KDKA and it was Bob Kudzma. I hear he drives a school bus now. Can't even imagine the weather guy you grew up with now driving a school bus, but I think that's what he does now.
I was going to ask you who your favorite local weather person was.
So in Pittsburgh, that was it. But then as we moved to California, it was definitely because every California weatherman has a weird name, right? There's Johnny Mountain, there's Dallas Rains. Like they all have weird weathery names, right? So for me, it was Dallas Rains. That was my favorite. But
was he the like the really tan one?
Yeah, with the feathered hair. Yeah, and
right.
He's still tan, and his feathered hair is great now. Yeah, Dallas Rains. That's him. At any rate,
he can't still be doing the weather, right? I mean,
he is. No, he's still doing the weather.
Okay, well,
you might want to catch some webcasts of Dallas Rain. He probably has a podcast you could tune into too.
All right.
At any rate, that's what we're going to be talking about. That you either picked up the phone and dialed 555-1212 and heard the voice on the other end saying, "Tomorrow it will be 72 degrees and sunny." That's all you would have heard if you lived in California. In Pennsylvania, it'd be like thunderstorms possible. That's kind of how it went there, right? And it would feed the data, right? By doing that, you would get that information, and it was feeding real-time data into a machine, and then that was telling you what the weather was going to be. And sometimes it was just the current temperature. And Marc, do you remember when it was just the time? Like you could call a number and it'll tell you what time it is.
I told you my little story about that, and to repeat that, I think it was ages and ages before I figured out that the 3 digits and the prefix there, if you look at the actual letters on the pad, you spelled out time. So if you wanted to know what the time is, it's TME and then 1212. Ages. I didn't know that for like decades. It was always what my parents had told me. It was UL3. And like, what does UL3 mean? I don't know what the hell that means. So for ages. Yeah, but that was a simple IVR interface, right? As you said, the data gets sucked into the IVR, set as a recording, you dial in, it picks up which prefix you're coming from, and then, there you go.
Yeah, right. It was a recorded message with information from a local weather station. So back then, that was a big deal though, right? That was something on demand. And we didn't have that. There were no smartphones in our pockets, and some of us didn't even have cell phones yet. And we all remember the moment when you dial in and you hope the weather report that's about to start is going to be a snow day. Like that's the only reason a kid would ever jump out of bed in middle school, run down to the phone and dial 555-1212 to see how many inches of snow we're going to get tomorrow. Yeah, that's when that number was important to me. Well, you grew up in California. Never. You didn't have snow days. You had 72 and sunny every day.
That's right. It was the same. It was slightly hot, slightly cool. That was it. So I didn't get any of that. And in fact, it's funny because thinking about dialing for the weather, that was a service I rarely used. It was something that it just didn't occur to me because all you had to do was go outside. It was going to be the same tomorrow as it was today.
Right.
So it was, I can't even think how many times I probably used that when I was growing up. I literally dialed time more than I dialed the weather, and then watched Dallas Rains or Johnny Mountain or whatever. I think
Right.
Johnny Mountain was probably the guy that I watched the most.
Right.
But that limited IVR capability had near zero downtime.
Yeah,
So
I was going to
you
say
know,
it had a certain, even though it was low tech, it was extremely reliable, right?
stream.
And it was getting constant updates from local stations. So it was extremely reliable way of getting information and making it available to people who would want it without bothering the people who didn't, right? Like that on demand thing where I called and it told me, like that's the perfect way to handle that kind of stuff. And so, yeah, you're right. It was like, by that time, telephones are commoditized, but like that kind of service wasn't for sure. That's for
That's
sure
right.
wasn't commoditized. So,
Dial tone is what, near 100% reliability.
yes, right. And if you guys don't remember what a dial tone is, when you actually have a phone plugged into a wall, when you pick it up, you hear doo, and you're like, oh, I can dial the number now. If you heard it, nothing, the killer was in the house. But if you heard that, then you're like, oh, I can dial. Cell phones don't work like that. So when you guys like pick a like contact and it dial, you don't hear anything, it just connects. Yeah, yeah, that wasn't it. You couldn't even dial the number, and sometimes you heard someone talking, and then it was your ethics. Did you hang up or did you hang around? Like that's my
Yeah.
question to you, right? That's what it was like to use a phone back in the day.
I kind of wonder if these weather dialing services still exist. I haven't living in the UK. I just don't know. I didn't grow up with that, so I don't know. But that may be an experiment we have to do to see if you can still
I
dial
don't
for
remember
weather.
did it get rolled in with 411 or like I don't know.
Yeah,
It's all automated now though. You don't talk to people anymore.
right.
There's no zero for the operator. We don't do that stuff now. I don't think that phone company has real people anymore. I just think they're just big, just big central offices with a couple
But
guys
there
that
is an
come by once in a
yeah.
while.
You
Right.
can still dial an operator and do assisted calls and things like that. But yeah, I don't know if it's a person.
Yeah, right. So, okay, so this brings us to the idea, right? That in the late 1990s to the early 2000s, things started to change. The internet started booming, and suddenly you didn't have to wait for the weather line to pick up or dial a number. You could get the forecast in an instant from a website like weather.com or AccuWeather. You could actually see maps and forecasts and weather radar in real time. And the internet made getting weather info faster, but we still relied on the traditional data from weather stations and satellites. It was great, but it wasn't super personalized, right? I couldn't tell you for my zip code, here's what the weather's going to be like for the next 3 days. If you lived in a big city, the forecast you saw online might be accurate for the general area, but not necessarily for your neighborhood.
Right.
And that's when we hit a turning point in weather forecasting technology, right, Mark? Like that idea that we could be way more hyper local in how we get this information and what we do with that.
And not only hyper local, but just a better interface as well. So if I'm on the phone and I'm listening and I'm trying to wait to see what the temperature is. Probably temperatures first, I don't know, but chance of precipitation or whatever it's and the voice on the other end of that phone was, dragging along. But now I could literally go and see exactly what temperature, the barometric pressure, is it rising, is it falling? What's the chance of rain? What does that look like for the next 10 days, let alone just tomorrow? And, that UX, I instantly have the ability to check exactly what I want rather than wait on, a very slow reading or touch tone generated voice, the pre AI voice generated responses. And that UX jumped massively because it was now a consumer facing platform rather than, a thing consumed by weather stations and scientific labs and stuff. But you're right, it's like this one forecast fits most model rather than, the ability to personalize down to the, zip code area.
So here comes the next revolution, hyperlocal weather stations. Imagine this: instead of relying on a handful of weather stations scattered across your city or region, there's now a network of small, low cost sensors, often set up on rooftops and backyards or even in public spaces. These sensors measure things like temperature, humidity, pressure, even wind speed, all in real time. And this is where IoT, or the Internet of Things, meets weather forecasting. These little sensors are constantly collecting data, and that data is then sent to the cloud, not the weather cloud, the data cloud, where it can be analyzed and used for much more accurate and personalized forecasting. For example, if there's a storm brewing, these sensors can provide hyperlocal updates. You might get a notification saying, hey, your neighborhood is going to see rain in 20 minutes, but it's going to miss the next block over. That's the power of hyperlocal weather forecasting. I don't know how many times it's ever happened to you, but like my parents' house isn't that big. I remember visiting with them, looking into the backyard the whole time. I walk out front and the whole front of the housing complex is soaking wet. It rained out front, but not out back. That's how hyper local the weather got, right? So it is true. Like the idea that you can be better at that based on how good the sensors get. And so let's talk about that. Like, let's talk about how sensors are being leveraged for that kind of stuff, because I think it's a huge, like quantum leap from what we were doing before, which was half Farmer's Almanac and half radar, right?
But speaking about these sensors, we went from very expensive satellites that go up and these weather stations. There's a really great weather station outside of Boulder that's a lot of fun to go to if you're ever in Colorado. But these are very massive, large, set up on a mountain somewhere.
Yeah.
With radar towers and all of that, to, as you said, small sensors, low cost sensors. And the idea is that you deploy this mesh of low cost sensors rather than, one or two or 10, whatever, big, expensive sensors. And you throw out tons and tons of, tens, hundreds, thousands of these lower cost sensors, and you build a mesh, which essentially builds a pattern visualization, the information around that hyperlocal capability. So, if I've got a sensor at the top of my house, which I when I bought this place, I didn't know what I was looking at. There was literally a weather vane up on top and a little, set of sensors on it. Guess what? The previous owner had a Net Atmo little station at the top of at the chimney. So I've got a little weather station up at the top, and, it just feeds data up into the cloud. But, if my neighbor, one or two houses away or even next door has a similar setup, those two sensors collect very different bits of information. And that small differential is what helps build that, that hyperlocal model, which is very interesting how, lower cost sensors, but more of them actually build you a more accurate model of your weather patterns and data. It's kind of like RAID, RAID for weather, right?
Are you
If
talking
one of
about
these
hard
goes down,
drives?
yeah, exactly.
All right,
If
for
one
those
of
of
the
you listening who've never configured a RAID drive, it just meant that you have more than one drive and you wrote the data across the drives instead of filling the drive up and going to the next drive. You wrote across the drives, and then you wrote algorithms to recreate the drive. Should you lose one, you can pop in a blank one and it'll just rewrite it because it had all the other information it needed to do it. That's a RAID drive. Go ahead, Mark. So yeah, it's like a RAID.
it's thank you for the
It's okay.
explanation.
You know what? It's the 20 somethings. They're like, who cares? It's
Well,
in the cloud. Like,
well,
honest to God,
yeah,
like I'm provisioning something. I don't really care about how the hardware is configured. It's not my gig. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
fair enough. But this kind of idea, this is great, right? As one sensor goes bad, then
Yeah. It doesn't
it
blow
doesn't
up.
take the whole system down, right?
Yeah.
And you can replace that one, at your leisure. So that's really cool. So that kind of RAID idea or mesh idea is very applicable. But what I think is kind of interesting and fascinating about all this hyperlocal data, that hyper localization of other types of information, where we go, what we shop for, how much we spend, all of that. Like some of that data is sort of creepy, right? But weather data, like this is probably the least creepy application of that uh
I'm going to give you,
that
I'll give you that on the
big
creep
data.
factor of 0 to 5. It's like a 1. But here's the thing. I remember a vendor telling me one time, this was a vendor who has data that rivals NOAA data for hurricane predictions. Like it's really good data, but they said we have hyperlocal data because your Ring phone camera system has barometer data in it. It knows the
Oh,
temperature,
right.
it knows all that. So you can be hyper local down to like me personally. Here's what my weather is right this second because you have access to my Ring door data.
Yeah,
And you know what? You don't even need it by street address or my last name. You can just have it by the zip code. But now you have
right.
the fluctuating weather within that zip code again, right? Like just your Ring, doorbell is the way they get hyper local data. So with all
Right.
those data points, but that brings me to the real game changer, right? And that's machine learning. You get all this data from all these sensors, phones, the tops of Mark's house, other places, who knows, that hit like somewhere on top of the San Andreas fault. I'm pretty sure they're looking there too, right? Like all of that is out there. And machine learning models step in to process the information. Now think about this, because here's where we were before this all started, right? It was the Farmer's Almanac. At the end of the year, they just wrote it all down. Today, the temperature
Right.
was this. Today, the temperature was this. Here's how much rain we had. Here's how much. And eventually, over the course of many, 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 many decades and then a century, we're able to say, here's what a weather pattern looks like. And the Farmer's Almanac is really just saying, here's what it was like this whole time. Chances are it's going to be like that in the future. And here's our prediction for what that's going to be. And they're basing that all on data collected by farmers. Now we're collecting it from your Ring doorbell. So we have exponential amounts of data we have to deal with now. So the only way we're going to get through that massive amount of data, the weather trends, the historical data, the real-time sensor input, and then turn that into a super specific forecast, the only way we do that is with AI and machine learning. So instead of just
Yes.
saying it's going to rain tomorrow, these AI models can predict things like how much rain, how long the storm is going to last, even what time you should expect the worst of it. It's almost like having a personal weather forecaster in your pocket. Oh, it's like a Dallas rains in my pocket. And the best part, the more the AI gets, the more accurate it becomes. So it's telemetry now. Like we can make changes to our future based on the real-time information. We've heard sirens a million
Yeah.
times. Why am I going to go get in my storm shelter today? Nothing bad. That's why people stick around for hurricanes. It's never been that bad until Katrina hit. And then you're like, oh, we should probably leave and not stay for these, right? Like, so
Yeah.
like the historical knowledge, I think, of weather events leaving somebody is a real thing. But this idea that we've had more data than we've ever had. We have AI has a way to get through it. We can use all of that to make really, really accurate predictions and then use them for things like rescuing people at sea and making bourbon on the high seas. Like we leverage all of that for 1,000 reasons, right? So like we're headed in the right direction, right, Mark? We're headed in the right direction.
I think it is heading in the right direction. We used, sort of hyper local sensors, even in point of sale systems, where we had barometric and temperature systems in point of sale systems. And that helped us figure out, what was, what was people more likely to buy during what weather conditions. And maybe that's not the scenario that helps people, but it does help, figure
I always
out.
I always talk
Yeah,
about
go
that
ahead.
as a good machine learning kind of activity, right? Take your sales data from the last 5 years, take the weather data from the last 5 years, match
Yeah,
them up and see if it comes up with anything good. Like it'll
yeah,
probably tell you something about how to staff your store. Like I'm sure it would.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, the UK, the common denominator is rain. So, you could throw the rain out and then, just small variations and, and other
Right.
weather patterns.
Right. If it's
Um,
if it's like 10 degrees out, do they still show up? Like, when it's snowing in London, is it really like Bridget Jones where she's running down the street in her underwear and there's no one out? Like, I don't know.
yeah, yeah. Well, sometimes it is like that. Yeah, this capability, right, to collect all of this information, to then build the model, to then analyze that, and then disseminate that information, to my watch, right, to my phone, whatever.
To your
Um,
watch.
Yeah, you know, I stopped wearing the Apple Watch because it was just buzzing too much for me. So I had to, for anxiety and all that. So I had to take it off and get rid of it. But that's a useful scenario. It's a useful use case for us to know, if I need an umbrella or don't need an umbrella. But that's sort of, I don't know, that's a very personal use case. That's a very, apropos use case for an individual. But the broader sense, things like supply chain, logistics, you know, global economic factors,
Food
troop
supply chain.
movements, food supply chains, all of this stuff, we're deeply, deeply tied to weather systems and climate. And, being able to predict what's going to happen is, it's more useful than do I need an umbrella or not?
I think that's true. And if that data goes bad or that data is not trusted, and I think that's what like the biggest thing I worry about now is like one day somebody will just say, I just don't trust NOAA data anymore. And then what? Like we do have vessels on the high seas that rely on NOAA data. We
Right.
do have airline pilots that your mom's flying on that flight and they need to know what the wind speeds are. Like there is reason for this stuff that goes far beyond I don't whatever the hell anybody climate change. Like it goes far beyond that. The idea that
Yeah.
you're going to use all of this to paint a picture of how we should spend money as a country, whatever. But at the same time, we really do need this data. We need it in real time and we need it to be accurate. Otherwise, people die. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not an abstract, right? It's not an
No,
abstract.
it's not. It's not an abstract. So, well, I have a little bit about Hurricane Harvey,
Tell
and
me
you may
about it.
not. I know you may not remember Hurricane Harvey. Everybody talks about Katrina, and for good reason. But Harvey was a Category 4 storm in August 25th, 2017. So not that far, in the distant past here. Rockport, Texas. Essentially, the whole Gulfport area of Texas was hit. Now, here's some stats on it. Dumped 40 to 60 inches of rain in some
Wow.
areas. Now, for our metric friends, that's 1,000 to 1,500 millimeters of rain. So freedom metrics 40 to 60 inches, and regular metrics 1,000 to 1,500 millimeters. It's one of the wettest tropical cyclones in U.S. history. So quite a lot of rain in a very short amount of time. So here are the ports that got shut down for about a week, sometimes more. The Port of Houston, the Port of Corpus Christi, the Port of Galveston, all shut down from late August to early September of 2017. Okay, so what do you think the Port of Houston's largest tonnage is for?
Oil.
Yeah, good choice. Foreign waterborne tonnage. So everything that gets shipped out, the biggest, largest port is foreign waterborne tonnage. The big, component of that is petrochemical exports,
Yeah.
plastic resins, base chemicals, refined
Uh,
products. So it's the primary U.S. hub for basically all U.S. petro exports, containers, bulk grain, crude oil, natural gas. So shipping was halted for about 6, 7 days, about a week, because of flooded roads, flooded rail. When the rail gets flooded, it's really bad because those are built up on
up on
berms and,
yeah.
and raised. Port terminals were damaged, and then this is the thing that really hits home: closed refineries and chemical plants. So basically, a third of U.S. chemical production capacity was down for several weeks. Several weeks. And that represents 25% of oil refining capacity in the US. That's a huge impact. And it shifted, because of that impact, it shifted gas, diesel, jet fuel pricing, all of that, plastics and resins production. The spot prices for plastics spiked. Like that's how big an impact weather has on supply chain. Just in that one use case around petrochemicals, that petrochemical use case has knock-on impacts around pipeline, gas, diesel, jet fuel, plastics, plastic resin, and a bunch of other chemical manufacturing. So resin shortages, turn into plastic shortages. Plastic shortages turn into I can't get the components for my car. car manufacturing. I can't get the components for pharmaceuticals. I can't get the components for consumer goods. And all of a sudden you have this huge knock-on impact. It's a really fascinating case of, one weather event that has a massive knock-on impact across not just, oil and gas, which is that big importer there or exporter there, but tons and tons of other industries.
Yeah, it was like when Puerto Rico was underwater and all of a sudden you couldn't get surgical masks, you couldn't get IV bags, you couldn't get the tubes you
Right.
needed to run IVs. And all of a sudden, if you were scheduled for surgery, they were canceling it because they just didn't have enough of the stuff they needed to perform that surgery because Puerto Rico was underwater. Like it absolutely in that global economy, like I feel like weather is the one existential risk we are the worst at dealing with. Just overall corporations just really, really bad at thinking about what this means and how they're going to survive the next 100 years. Because Simon and Schuster, they're based in New Jersey. It was Superstorm Sandy. Remember Superstorm Sandy?
Right.
Like they thought,
Yes.
come on now, how much water could it possibly be until the first 3 floors were flooded? Guess what was in the
Right.
basement? Like all the books waiting to be shipped out that were printed. Like that's like, and why wouldn't you put those on the top floor? Because seriously, like how's it gonna? It's not gonna flood, right? Like it's that idea that I know better. I'm not gonna. It's not gonna happen. Like we need to get over that. We need to find something we can trust, and I hope it continues to be this kind of data. So, what does it mean for us, the everyday folks trying to figure out what to wear or if we need to grab an umbrella before heading out? Well, with hyperlocal sensor networks and AI-powered forecasts, the weather information you get is really much more precise than Bob Cudma being like, I don't know, the Mon Wharf might flood. Sam's going to like that one. Imagine a world where instead of checking a general weather app, you get hyper-local updates directly from sensor networks right around you. Maybe you live near a park or a stadium, or maybe it's your solar panels that are telling you what's going on. With the help of IoT sensors and AI, you can now get real-time tailored forecasts. It's like having your own personal weather station everywhere you go. But Marc, we talked about this, right? But let's talk about sustainability. These local sensors don't just help adjust with forecasts, but with environmental monitoring too, right? Some sensor networks are tracking air quality or pollution levels in addition to weather. And that's something we didn't have access to in the past. The more data we collect, the better we understand our environments and make smarter, more eco-friendly decisions. So IoT advances in weather forecasting, I mean, sensors are everywhere.
Right.
We know a lot. We know way more than we ever did. And to really be good at this, we have to get really, really good at these algorithms, right? The value
Right.
will be in the algorithm and how good you are at leveraging it, right?
Well, I think the sustainability piece is not one that should be underestimated because, weather, like one of the big outcomes of weather, let's say, is water. How much water falls on the ground? How dry is it? How hot is it, right? How quickly is that water that's on the ground and in the ground? How quickly does that get consumed? And having that mesh, that super mesh of sensors allows you to monitor all of that water information in near real time. So thinking about, farming different types of crops, farming crops that are water drought resistant versus not drought resistant. And as a farmer, knowing where I can plant different types of crops at different times of the year or at different seasons, or even down to, I have got X amount of land using information, I'll know which bits of the land are better for different types of crop or even different varieties of the same type of crop. I did a tour of a winery not too long ago, but it's been probably a year or so. And it wasn't very large. It was only a few hundred acres. I think it was like 400 acres. And they had sensors distributed across their land so that they could tell temperature and humidity in all of the different areas, and they picked the varieties of grapes based on that sensor information because they could build a very accurate map of rainfall and temperature and humidity in their across that entire patch of land, so they could just choose where that is. Now, that was for grapes, which grapes are maybe not the most sustainable product on the market, but when you take that information and you take it to some place like sub-Saharan Africa, where the staple crop is sweet potatoes, where is it easier or harder to grow sweet potatoes? Which varieties of sweet potatoes will benefit from different hyperlocal information based on the sensor information that you have? And since these are lower cost sensors, lower cost information, pieces of data, different IoT devices and whatever, it's a lot more affordable for different communities to invest in that technology. I think we're still not quite there, but we have seen some communities start to pick up that fight and start to deploy very low cost sensors, even in sub-Saharan Africa.
If you drive across the United States, you'll start to see a bunch of farmland, and you'll see one trailer on that farmland with no windows in it, and you start to realize
Right.
like they can't possibly be living in there, right? And they're not. It's just an equipment shed, because what really is going on is that farmland is just filled with sensors. And unless if it's a company-owned farm, it doesn't belong to a family, it belongs to a company. Usually they're in different countries altogether, right? So they're getting sensor
Yep.
reads from a plot of land in the United States somewhere. It needs more water. They'll turn on the watering system, or the sensors know enough to turn on the watering
Right.
system so that they can clear the error, right? So like
That's
that's
right.
how it works now. Like remote farming is a real thing. It's a real
Yeah.
thing. If you're going to manage those crops over years, like you just do it from somewhere else, and you do it through a ton, and a ton of IoT, and the even my lawn sensors, right? You buy sensors for your lawn, so if your lawn's still wet, don't water it again today. Like that's a real thing. Like, did it rain earlier this week? Because if so, then I might not need to water next week. Like, it's part of our drought conditions in California. You're putting in new sprinklers. They better be the kind that have sensors in them, because otherwise, you get
I
yelled at.
I hadn't seen that. I hadn't seen that in kind of personal home applications, but I haven't lived in California in a long time. But here in the UK, I think that we're going to get to that point because, we've had, years of slowly creeping up temperatures and drier
Yeah.
seasons, longer periods of time without rain. And, nobody, I don't know of anybody in the village here or, gosh, anywhere in the UK that has a sprinkler system for their lawn. Like, why
You
would
don't
you
have
have a
air
sprinkler
conditioners
system?
either. Y'all have windows you open. Like, I don't know how
That's
any of you
right.
are going to survive any of this.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's in for the Fahrenheit crowd, it was in the 80s this week. And when it's in the 80s and no air conditioning, it's a little rough. But, you know,
It was
uh
115 here yesterday. I have two
yeah,
HVAC units, one for the bedrooms and one for the rest of the house. That's how much
right.
it takes to keep it cool here. And it's
Yeah.
80 in the house. Like right now, I think the house is set to 78. But if
Oof.
you walked outside, you'd be like, I'm sorry, it's hot out here. And you walk back in, you're like,
Yeah.
it's so cold in here. And it's 78
Yeah.
degrees, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But it's a dry heat, right? It's a dry.
Hey, you know what? If you live in the desert, 100 degrees is perfect. 90 and you got a sweater on. Like 100,
Uh,
perfect.
I don't know. I
80, I got a jacket. 65, I'm wearing a winter coat. Like it's just
uh,
I've got a completely skewed sense of what's hot and cold.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because the kids, they've spent so much time here in the UK that when they do go someplace hot, I took one of the kids to Singapore for a
That's humid
kind of
hot
a quick
though.
trip. Oh
That's
yeah, and
terrible.
it was rough. She was melting, but that was you get used to whatever you're in, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah, I would say after 4 years living in the California desert, I'm used to it. So anyway, let's talk about this for the very end. As technology evolves, we're going to see more advanced weather forecasting systems. I I want to put that out in the universe. In the future, we could be better at this. Just going to put that out there.
Sure.
Just put it out there. Think about smart cities that are powered by IoT, where every
Yeah.
street, every building has its own sensor feeding data into central models. These systems won't be able to just predict weather, they'll anticipate how different areas will react to certain weather conditions. Think about that in a smart city, right? Like we're going to have this much snowfall in this part of Boston, but almost none in this part of Boston.
Yeah.
Let's guide the traffic away from these places so we can plow them and to these places that we really don't have any traffic issues. And in the meantime, we're going to move all all of our assets that way because we don't have to worry about them anywhere else. We don't have to send cops out to look. We already know, right? Like that kind of stuff is actually really important for city infrastructure and how smart cities are going to work in the future. So talk about smart cities. Are there, because you travel more around the Middle East and the Far East
Yeah.
than way more than I do. So are there cities out there that you would think of as like living in the future in that way? Like they have a really good, I would think Dubai. I would think the Middle East
Yeah.
is actually pretty good at that.
Yeah, well, the Emirate, cities and that are definitely on that kick. Dubai, you mentioned, they have a smart city program. They're doing this now, right? Every building has a bunch of embedded sensors linked to all sorts of different central systems for cooling, transit, crowd management. So think about, you just used snowstorms in Boston, but in Dubai, they have crowd management for dust storms.
Mm.
So as dust storms kick up, these sensors in Dubai, they work with those crowd management systems, and alerts go out, don't go outside or come inside, these roads are going to be shut, or these transit options are still open for you. And that kind of information, and delivering that in an automated way rather than dialing up on a phone, that's really kind of where the future is. And I think that because Dubai itself is a young city, that level of infrastructure, which is built on a much newer set of foundations and newer foundational technology, rather than some old city like London or Paris, which has ancient foundations and ancient technology that they're built upon. So it's a different kind of dynamic. Singapore is the other one that I think that a lot of people use as an example. I travel a lot to Singapore, and one of the agencies, the National Environment Agency, is leading in that space around urban weather intelligence, which is kind of really interesting because that initiative or that agency uses weather information to influence things like transit and forecasting and all of that, which is great, but also things like flash floods, but dengue risk forecasting. So like living in California, you probably not thinking about dengue, but it's a real problem in tropical locales, and they use machine learning models to analyze historical dengue data along with environmental demo variables, and then they can pinpoint high risk zones ahead of outbreaks. And if you could take that and spread that to other places where you have dengue outbreaks, that would be a huge change in protecting your populace.
Yeah.
AI, they're using AI and ML for haze detection. They have satellites, that use this haze tracking system, which is quite interesting. But one kind of little factoid I thought was really kind of cool about Singapore is that they've deployed over 110,000 lamppost-based smart sensors in the city. And if you've ever been to Singapore, you know that it's not very big. So 110,000 sensors that are connected to all of these different weather and research systems, that's quite an investment in this smart technology and, an investment in the infrastructure of the city. And that benefit will be felt by every person of the populace for years to come.
Well, so there you have it. Our journey from calling 555-1212 for tomorrow's temps to AI-driven hyperlocal weather stations that can predict rain down to your backyard. Technology has certainly come a long way, and we're only scratching the surface of what's to come in the world of weather forecasting. One day, I didn't mention this, but I did take a meteorology class. I flunked it twice. The second time I had to tell the professor, I don't want to predict the weather. I just want to read it on TV. Like, please don't put me through this again. Like, I know I'm dumb. You're not protecting the Dallas rains from anything. You're not. You just help me, right? So thanks for tuning in to My Shame, this episode of the Nostalgic Nerds podcast. Be sure to subscribe. Let us know what you think. Hit us up on social media. Leave a comment. Mark, what's our email address?
nostalgicnerdspodcast@gmail.com.
There it is. Mark's in charge of hate mail. Send it to him. And so can't wait to talk to you again next time. Stay nerdy.
All right. Thanks, Renee.